So without further ado, we're going to be going into our next presentation. It's a huge hot topic in the rare community. We'll be discussing drug development, but specifically pricing. This panel brings together different perspectives on the challenges of drug pricing. What's the difference between value, pricing, and cost, and why these are really important conversations to have amongst stakeholders. Doug Paul is the Vice President of Partner Medical Marketing Economics, and he will be joined by Bruns, a parent advocate with the atypical hemolytic uremic syndrome. And Debra Miller is the Executive Director, or Chief Executive Officer, of Cure Duchenne. Before we dive into the discussion, we felt like it really wanted to set the tone for the conversation, and there is a Pfizer commercial that was released earlier this year that we think really illuminates that there are people behind those decisions on pricing and cost and wanting to get us to the finish line of getting those treatments to the hands of the consumers and patients that need them. It does take a village to get to that finish line, and a lot of obstacles along the way, and it never looks the same. So we just wanted to set the tone for this conversation that there's humans on both sides of the conversation, so how can we come to the table, have that dialogue, and find a happy medium? So without further ado, the video, and then we'll have our panelists.
Before it became a medicine, it was an idea, an inspiration, a wild what if. So scientists went to work. They examined 87 different protein structures, had 12 years of setbacks and breakthroughs, 4,423 sleepless nights, and countless trips back to the drawing board. At first they were told no. Well, maybe. And finally, yes. Then it was 36 clinical trials, 8,500 patient volunteers, and the hope of millions. And so after it became a medicine, someone who couldn't be cured could be. Me.
I think so. I have a few slides, because I think we just saw a great video that explains the challenges of what it takes to get a drug to the market. And I'm gonna hit on a few questions in here. And I think at the end we also want to have very much an open question and answer session where you can ask some of these direct questions. Little background on myself. I'm a pharmacist by training, and then went to get a PhD in pharmaceutical marketing and helped set up a consulting firm that helps drug companies navigate the challenges of reimbursement and access across the globe. And one of those challenges also is figuring out how to get that price. And we do that a lot for rare diseases as well as other diseases. But what I love about this, and I'm still that healthcare professional at heart, I love innovation. And I very much tie, and I would love the system to be different, but I think right now I still tie, much of that innovation is derived from and is fueled by the dollars and many of those prices. And I think that's what we're going to be covering in some of our slides here. That may not be coming up. So let's go with some of the broad.
Do we have an advancement here?
Let's go with so some of the broad questions that we want to hit up on are, and certainly I think we're looking at it from the patient perspective of, it takes a lot. These drugs are expensive, and now when they come out, they're really expensive. But also, we're seeing that there's a lot of, even in the U.S. when they are launched, there's different prices where you talk to your friend who's also suffering the same disease and may have very different price points for what you. So we just kind of want to walk through some of those and also explain globally that some of these price points and how they differ. Through those, I think when we talk about the risk, what I want you to think about is being a drug company, and there's two things I want you to think about. One being an individual drug company, and then also being the drug industry. And the way that I want you to think about the drug industry is there's obviously more than just individual decisions being on one drug, but there's essentially the macro industry that's occurring. And a lot of that is coming through and is fueled by investments. So the investments in order to go through all that process, the clinical studies, the basic science, to go through the clinical studies and get the approval process, you've got to have those dollars, and those are coming from the investors. So I want you to think about what the investors then are trying to do. And they're obviously trying to get a return on their dollar. Much of that is coming from de-risking the path from idea to being the drug approved, and then even more so, the drug on the market and being commercialized. And so that's where a lot of that risk, so whatever can occur to get that down as far as the risk helps extreme value. Now, when we get into some of the rare diseases, these are really small markets. And so the challenge that it comes, that same amount of money that it took to develop for a larger market is still taking to develop for these smaller markets. And so now we've got to spread those costs and understand that now in one price, and we get that to one what may be perceived by many, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think by anyone's standard is a very expensive drug. And so, but that's just at this point what it's taking to fuel that innovation and to de-risk and to make that worth the risk that are going forward. I apologize. I am thinking I missed my slides right now.
So we're trying to find your slides. So for some reason, we are missing some slides, so we're working on it. So he's good. He can do this.
I've got the figure to keep on going, so that's the motivation I was looking for. But I just want to, again, I just want to make sure that we get this as Q&A, and there's a couple things I just want to explain of how these challenges are. Recently, we had an example with DMDs getting a lot of press, and we're certainly going to go there. But a little over a year ago, BioMarin bought a DM, and I just want to give this example. Bought a late-stage DMD asset, and they paid over $600 million cash for it. Now, there are also additional stock options and things, but $600 million cash. About 14 months later, the FDA did not approve that product. That's $600 million, that's gone. Now, the catch is, that's where we've got to look at, so these big prices, that has to be paid for by somebody. So at some point, that's where I'm saying you got to look at the industry as a whole in a big ways to understand that $600 million cost has to be absorbed in other drugs. I don't think there's also some academic studies that say it takes $2 billion to get a drug. Individual companies, I'm not going to say spent $2 billion, but as a whole, and I think what we heard in that Pfizer commercial, think about all those failures. And that's what we're understanding, is that you just see the tip of the iceberg when we get that one drug that works. And that's why there's a lot of that's so costly, is because you've got to absorb all of that R&D and all the industries that failed. I know some companies that have probably made it, and maybe even some of the diseases that are here, that if you look from when the drug company was formed to where they were on the market, they may have been able to do it on $50–70 million. Relative to $2 billion, that's an incredible discount. But they still have to make a return on that investment. And sometimes when you're making that return on investment and there's a disease of less than 1,000 patients, you end up with the high numbers that you do, because there's no other way to go about it. Even some companies, and recently there's a gene therapies. There's a gene therapy in Unicure that has been used one time, and it's only been sold commercially once in the entire world. So Unicure created a drug, got it approved, and right now only one person in the world has taken it and it's been reimbursed through the German healthcare system. Now they got $1.4 million for it. That's a lot of money. However, you can imagine that certainly more than $1.4 million went into getting a drug approved and on the market. Also recently, GSK has come out and said that they will price, in the European markets, they have a gene therapy that will be priced at over $650,000. That's an incredibly large amount of money. However, GSK has also said that we don't expect to make our money back at that price. So GSK priced a gene therapy much lower than $1.4 million, but they could do that because they arguably had the luxury of making money from other drugs that could supplement that. There's some companies that are gene therapy companies that don't have that option to give a discount on their therapy. So I think we're going to be seeing gene therapies that are going to be 7 figures, and maybe the first number may not start with a 1. And I think that's just the reality of what we've got to do to continue this level of innovation. It's not. I don't think it's exciting, and it's what anybody wants as far as the high prices. I don't think anybody gets excited about that. But at this point, for innovation, and for one who loves myself, who loves innovation, that seems to be the price we're paying. And as we continue to go forward, I also want to explain the price differences that we see a lot in the United States. Of you sit across from, like I said, next to your colleague, and you're paying a different price. Well, it depends. A lot of these things, and this is where the drug companies have to learn this, and they go through this, but where you get your site of care. If you can get the same drug, and if you get it at home, it's very different price than if you get it in the physician's office than if you get it in the hospital. And I know it doesn't make sense, but it's just the way the U.S. healthcare system is set up. Another thing that makes it challenging, and this happens to be in the DMD community, is Medicaid. When they pay for a drug, let's say a drug costs $100, and that's what the drug company is selling it for. Medicaid says we're gonna sell it for, we're only gonna pay $76 roughly. They take a 23.1% discount. Now, if you have in DMD and you have a large Medicaid population, which is, let's say, just 40%, if we do that math, the drug company will never see $9 of that $100. So even though you're seeing a $100 price point, $9 of that doesn't ever really exist for the drug company. Another reason why you continue to see higher price points, because that's just one example of a rebate. There's other discounts that go further in it. And these are also dosing differences. We've talked about some of the other variations that you see. I also want to explain a little bit about the differences ex-US and US. First, a long time ago, or when I say long time ago, relatively, let's say 15, 20 years ago, there was a lot of times goals to try to make this one price throughout the world. Well, and that's a great aspiration, and at that time, it was relatively working, but we have what's called currency fluctuation. And so if you even look at what the dollar and the euro were, let's say roughly 2 years ago, there's now a 40% gap. So even when you try to price it all one way, you still get the currency fluctuation, and that can't be controlled. But now, even more so, we're seeing other companies, other countries go through what's called health technology assessments, and they're determining what they're going to pay for these. And many countries are ratcheting down the price on what's being paid for some of these rare diseases. The challenge there, I'm going to argue that that's really harmful to innovation, because we're seeing some companies not go into some of these countries. And that's certainly not what I would like to see for the rare disease community, but it is a reality that we're facing. And it makes it even more challenging, because if that company and those investors expected to get a global launch and aren't able to do so, that puts even more pressure, arguably, on the US price, which many will be bearing. So I'm going to pass it off, because I think this is the end of my slides. So I will pass it off and
this is
cover.
Nicole, so thank you for completely rallying right here. But so just to kind of jump in for a second, so our hope, and thank you for kind of painting the picture of what's happening both in country and outside the country in regards to pricing. Kind of the driver behind this session was a lot of the hysteria that we're hearing out in the marketplace right now about drug pricing. Most people in this room right now know what it takes. We saw the Pfizer video. We know what goes into running a business, a biotech, with several failures, very few successes, and that as a business, right, they have to make business decisions. What we wanted to make sure that everyone realized was that there was humans behind those decisions. And we also wanted to talk about the value of these drugs that are coming to market, and why pricing, the price of the drug, is also much different than what patients pay for the drug, what the price is to patients. And so we have two amazing panelists here also, Ann Bruns, whose son is on one of the most expensive drugs, and she'll tell you more. He's living and thriving and growing, and an amazing young man. And Debra Miller in the Duchenne community, who's clearly had a really rocky road over the last several years and has a really great story. Personally, as an investor in different biotechs and drug efforts, right? And what it's taken for them to finally get this success. So we think that this will kind of show a lot. It will show a lot about the value of a life-saving drug being made available, the work that the biotech and pharma companies actually, the lengths that they go to ensure that patients can actually get that drug. And then from a firsthand experience from a patient, really showcasing the journey on drug investment, drug development, and ultimately, finally having a success story. So I don't know which of you guys was planning on going first, but I'll let you take it from there.
So thank you very much, Nicole, and I can vouch that Doug has some really, really good slides. And so we're all going to wing it up here, and this is great. So yes, I actually am here wearing 3 different hats. I have a 19-year-old son with Duchenne. I lead a patient advocacy group, and we are an investor through Duchenne Ventures in several biotech companies that are developing drugs for Duchenne. So I do see quite a few different angles about the drug pricing. So, you know, I will echo what Doug said. To me, if I had to say what was most important to me in this whole conversation would be innovation. As a parent, innovation is everything. Without innovation, we wouldn't be celebrating our first drug approval ever for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And I will take you back to 2007. So my son was diagnosed in 2002. We started Cure Duchenne in 2003. We invested in Prosenza, which was later bought out by BioMarin, in 2004. In 2007, you know, during that time, we were also working with AVI, which is now Sarepta, and they were on clinical hold, and they needed to do more toxicology study in order to go into human clinical trials, and they were just having a tough time raising the money to do that. And so I was working with a scientist, Eric Hoffman, and who is a big believer in this technology. And we actually got on a plane and went down to Mexico City together to try and figure out a way that we could get around the system and actually test these drugs in people, because they seem to be doing so well in the animal models. And so that just goes back to show, you know, AVI was already developing this drug before we got involved. But that was all the way back in 2007 when we took that trip to Mexico City. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm not sure, it didn't work out that we could move forward with drug development down there. But, and so finally, when we gave up on that scenario in 2010, Cure Duchenne, along with the Foundation to Eradicate Duchenne, and led by Eric Hoffman in Children's National Medical Center, invested, or we contributed quite a bit of money to AVI to enable them to get off clinical hold, and by doing some additional toxicology studies. So we're in 2016 going into 2017. And so, you know, we're two decades of drug development to get where they are today. And I can tell you the ups and downs, the highs and lows are tremendous. And so when I talk about my priorities, I do understand the pricing that they've set is pretty aggressive, but I also understand that boys are responding, boys are walking longer than they should be walking, and our whole community has hope because of that innovation. And it comes back to the cost of capital. Had there not been the capital there, had these foundations, you know, gotten together and funded that, who knows what would happen? And there's lots of other biotech companies that are fledgling right now that are looking for capital, that have wonderful ideas, and they are going to put not only the founder's heart and soul and entire life into it, but investors' money, and it's going to be a really long and rocky process. And it will take years of showing a profit to recoup those investments. Not to mention, most of these drugs for rare diseases are extremely expensive to manufacture. The morpholinos, you start off with, you know, this much product and you end up with a vial over the production process of it. And so, we have to be mindful of the actual hard costs, and not to mention, like Doug said, the delivery. I mean, most of these drugs, are being delivered IV infusion in an infusion center. And the companies that are coming online now with drugs, whether it be Sarepta, Marathon, some of these other companies, even before they have an approved drug, even before they see revenue, they are investing a huge amount of money and resources into patient support, to deal with the insurance companies, to provide guidance and care for the patients. So there's a whole bunch that goes into it. And so the cost to capital is key to innovation. And on the flip side, without the innovation, meaning the capital that is funding that, we have stagnation, and we have a situation where, and it already exists to a certain extent between regulations that are expensive and slow down the process, both just business regulations as well as regulatory agencies that review the science, and liability. So, things can go wrong. And when companies are held to be so responsible that it can knock a company out, all of this does tend to slow down innovation. And we certainly can't do without any of this, but I think we just need to be mindful of, do we want drugs for our kids? And as a mom, I'll say, yes, we want drugs for our kids. And so let's figure out a way to accommodate these pricing and be innovative. And again, my experiences on Duchenne, I don't claim to be an expert in pricing. I have, very, very narrow focus on the drug development business, and it has to do only with Duchenne. But I would give anything if this drug that just got approved would help my son. And I'm very motivated to continue driving innovation. We have a venture philanthropy model, as Nicole mentioned, where we were able to see a return from our first investment that has populated, I have slides. Cool. I don't have a controller, so if you can move forward a couple. There you go. That's good. So venture philanthropy model, one more. Thank you. Where we basically, because we have a very, very deep knowledge of one particular subject, meaning Duchenne, we are able to go in and take a chance on these very early scientific projects and provide funding when a lot of companies won't. It's too risky for them. So we'll go in and provide seed money for a project very early on. We de-risk it not only by providing the capital, but also providing the expertise that a lot of companies don't have. And as we go through the drug development process, if there is a return that comes back to Cure Duchenne Ventures, then that money is plowed right back into more scientific projects. If you could move the slide one more. And this is an example of this one investment and how it's moved and seeded 5 other projects, 4 of these being biotech companies, one of them academic project. So in addition to providing the funding, Cure Duchenne also provides the patient information, registry information, and just overall knowledge to help these companies shortcut their development process. And if you could go, if you can go back one after here, well, one more back, one more down. Other way. There. Okay, another example is, and these are, just information to share with other advocacy groups. Huh.
The golden.
Yay, thank you. To share with other advocacy groups, because, if we do want to keep prices down, then as much as we can do as advocacy groups to help the companies keep the prices down, it's in all of our best interests. And so not only in providing seed funding, but we also try and help these companies cut their costs and be more efficient with their clinical trial design. Cure Duchenne sponsored a project called CTAP, the Collaborative Trajectory Analysis Project. And I can tell you what the goal of this project is and the success of it. I cannot begin to tell you the statistical analysis of it because it boggles my mind. But it's basically being able to take a lot of data, more data than we have traditionally been putting into the planning of designing a clinical trial, and being able to apply statistical analysis that will predict against natural history what the outcome would be. And so this is going to be a tool, we've already published a paper on it, that we'll be able to share with industry, and we'll be able to share with the FDA. and compare it to natural history and hopefully shorten that time that it takes to get a drug approved, therefore, cutting the costs, hopefully. And I think Maureen had asked me to talk a little bit just about what patient advocates could do to help in this pricing situation. And I would say, we're all celebrating Sarepta's approval, and we're so excited. But the fact is that this is not a cure. It will hopefully dramatically slow down the progression of this disease. It does not address the primary cause of death, which is cardiac failure. And it only treats 13% of the patients. Fortunately, Sarepta is working on a whole pipeline of other drugs, but we still have to be mindful that we need to fund a lot more research. And the last thing that we as a patient group need to be is complacent, because otherwise we're never going to get that next approval that's really meaningful. So right now we're raising funds for gene therapy and CRISPR and different projects. So I think as patient advocates, as hard as raising money is, it's like really key to driving innovation and helping the companies. I talked about designing good clinical trials. Obviously participating in clinical trials, at least in the Duchenne community, it doesn't seem to be a problem. I think finding the right patients can be a problem for pharma, but most of the advocates are pretty anxious to be involved. And then obviously advocating with the regulators can be effective. So I think that's it for me. Basically, I think we need to be mindful of pricing, but the last thing I would like to see are caps put on where companies will be hesitant to innovate. I happened to be in a conference earlier this week talking with the consulate of a Norwegian company, one of the ambassadors here, and we started talking. Actually, we got on the subject about fundraising, and he laughed and said that their fundraising in his country basically is paying their taxes. And so, somehow, he said, but that's okay because all of our health care is taken care of. And then we got on the subject of innovation, and we talked about the fact that there's no innovation, no medical innovation going on in his country. And so, we still, as the U.S., I believe, are the leaders in innovation, and I would caution about getting too heavy-handed with the company's ability to make a profit, because for the most part, that's going to be funneled right down into new drugs and new innovation.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Anne, and I am here as a parent advocate and also as a foundation representative for our foundation. So my son Ethan is 12 years old and just started 7th grade, which is a whole new challenge in our house. But 3.5 years ago, he suddenly became ill, and within 48 hours was in our children's hospital. And we spent the next 2.5 weeks not knowing if we were going to bring him home. And I know a lot of you parents can relate to this issue. And as a normal American family, we have, sometimes there's months that are paycheck to paycheck, and the last thing that's on your mind is, how am I going to pay for these medical bills? Because we could see them racking up quickly. Like many parents do when their child is sick, we're hoping for a miracle. And our miracle came in the form of a medication, and luckily we have a treatment. There's so many thousands of diseases and only less than 5% have a treatment. And we're fortunate that we have one. And that was our miracle. And it had only been approved 2 years prior to him becoming sick. And with that comes a heavy price tag. We have one of the most expensive drugs in the world. And like it's been alluded to, that cost differs once it leaves the pharmaceutical company. Within our foundation, we have different patients paying different amounts. We're almost $500,000 a year for my son. He gets an infusion by IV every 14 days. So there's a heavy price tag that comes with that, but one of the things we are talking about today is the value of that. And the value is that 3.5 years ago, I watched my son in the hospital for over a month, not knowing how he was going to be, not knowing if he was going to bring home, and he had a dose of this medication, and 24 hours later, he looked actually like he was going to live to see the next day. And he just started 7th grade, and he lives a very normal life. Oh, this might be the cutest slide of the whole summer, I'm not gonna lie. So the picture on your left would be him at age 8.5, just a few weeks into his hospital stay. Couldn't even hardly lift his head off the bed. The next picture, he goes down to our children's hospital. We're in Salt Lake City, Utah, and gets that IV, and he rocks that appointment every single time. One of the pictures is our feet. We like to take pictures of our feet. I don't know why, but we've got them in almost every hospital bed we've ever been in. And the picture on the far side is the first day of 7th grade. And there's the value in a drug company. We had the privilege on Rare Disease Day this year to go back to Connecticut to our pharmaceutical company and spend the day with the company and sit down with the man who created this drug. Almost 20 years ago, he had an idea. And almost 20 years ago, I met this handsome fella in college. And who would have thought that 20 years later, we would be sitting across the table from him, thanking him for allowing our son to be as healthy as he can be and to be thriving and surviving. This kid wants to be a molecular bioengineer. I had to look that up. I didn't know what it meant. But it changes. A drug has the opportunity to change a life, not to only make him and every patient in our community be able to, go about their normal routines, but to see the future. I'm fortunate today to be here with our foundation, other members, and one of them is a girl named Alyssa who had a much more difficult time when she was first diagnosed. And she's also on this treatment, and she is surviving, and she is thriving, and she is giving back to her community as well. And that's what it's about. When you look at this value, do I wish that this price tag on our drug was smaller? Sure. But I also know that this company has now, since just only in the last 2 years, has found 3 to 4 new drugs and are helping that many more patients. To me, that's a benefit. If I'm paying a price tag and someone else is going to be able to have a treatment as well, I'm willing to pay that. As a mother, how many mothers out here, it doesn't matter what the cost of that drug is, right? You're willing to give it. My son was losing both of his kidneys, less than 5%. Any of us would have gladly given him all of our kidneys, to save him. It's the same thing. When we look at the pricing, yes, there needs to be changes, but the value is that it's being able to move these community and these patients forward and to give them a chance to just survive and to be able to do the things that they want to do. I look at it long term and I think, he's only 12, but he has great ambitions. And how am I going to pay for apparently med school and his drug at the same time? It'll work out because in the end, his health is what matters the most, and he has health because of medications. And the innovation that someone had 20 years ago is what puts him where he's at today, currently swimming at the pool, not doing his homework like he's supposed to be doing. And so the innovation is there, and to be able to find ways to fund these smaller groups and for Duchenne and these foundations to be able to give, just the means to get them started, that's where we need to look into and help support that. And I think as foundation leaders, we can look at ways that we can build our community and reach out to those companies and let them know that we're there to support them because we have their patients and we want them to succeed just as much as we want our patients to be healthy as well.
Excellent. Thank you guys so much. I think that there's probably quite a few questions or comments. Again, we're not going to solve all these problems overnight. And, this is a highly contested topic. But I think together, and why we're all here, it's important for us to kind of talk and bring this dialogue to the table, really understand, the challenges, and really try to be problem solvers and be part of that change and part of this process. So I'm gonna, if anyone has questions or comments, we have our mic runners. They'd be happy to assist.
Good afternoon. My name is Jose Morales. I'm with the Cystinosis Research Network. My question is around the whole idea that what the picture that you've painted is the existing paradigm, the business model that exists out there. And whereas I understand from a business perspective in terms of the bottom line and the need to make profit and shareholder value and all those things, My curiosity is around changing the paradigm in terms of what it takes to take a drug from the very beginning all the way to market. Because part of that cost is self-inflicted, in my estimation. And I'm not talking about changing the standards of safety, protocols, et cetera, but what is being done to look at the model that takes the research all the way through a drug so that we can actually drive some of the costs down, not only for us as patients, but also for pharmaceuticals. So it's not necessarily just accepting the existing model and trying to live within those parameters, because I think we have to do that in the interim. But how about the other side of the coin?
Could I ask you to clarify one thing? When you said that some of these costs are self-inflicted, could you give an example or two?
Well, think about the costs associated with the FDA and the different standards between the United States and Europe or Canada. And part of that cost is associated with it. And I'm not the expert to tell you what should or should not be included, but I know from a business process perspective, invariably there are inefficiencies into processes, whether they can be on the quality side, whether it be the number of iterations, but somewhere along the line, especially as a father of an individual that has a rare disorder, that costs, that's time, cycle time, right? Cycle time between the research to the point where we have an FDA-approved product that you can give to your kid. And some of our kids can't live that long. So even collapse in that piece.
So it's not necessarily the companies that are self-inflicting these things, it's more the system is.
Well, I think it's the entire industry, right? It's not just the pharmaceuticals. It's also, the regulatory side that we need. But looking at it from holistically, not just that vertical industry by industry or product by product. It's the holistic horizontal view that says we're going to make the cost of taking the research, a drug through that whole process and get it done quicker and in a more cost-effective way. And who owns that, right? Ultimately, who's going to look at that? Because I don't think there's a overarching entity, and I think that's the paradigm that we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, so I'll defer this to Doug, but what I'd like to say on this is I think that, when we talk about innovation and changes happening really, really quickly, exponentially now, I think that there obviously is room for improvement with the regulatory process. Is it lagging behind the innovation that's happening in science and technology? Most absolutely. So, I'll just give my 2 cents that, yeah, there is room for regulatory improvement that could help the development process.
I'm open to any of those. I mean, and again, I love innovation, and I would welcome anything that can improve the efficiency of that innovation. I agree that I am working under the assumption that we are working in the current model, and I don't believe the current model is by any means the best model out there, the best model possible. However, it's the best one that I know of now. I'm open to those ideas. The challenge is I've seen a lot of those ideas fall apart as these other means. Some rely on academia to produce products, and then again, it's not just the production, it's then the development. Then there's another fee that I think, and it's not really respected or understood, but to commercialize, and so to take this, even if you have an FDA-approved product, you still have to get it out and accessible to people, and that still takes a lot of money too. All of these, I'm willing to anything that would make that more efficient, because I believe that as we de-risk the entire process, we're going to see more people come into the markets or individual diseases. And I think we're seeing that now already. Many rare diseases have multiple therapies. Why? Because the second therapy is a lot easier to get in, because a lot more things are known. So I'm very open to anything. I just haven't identified those yet.
Yeah, and we actually have Tim Miller here from Aviona that would love to comment and also participate.
Hi, thanks. I actually wanted to answer the part of the question that came up earlier about some of the incentives in biotech. So, the process itself for rare disease has been accelerated in many different ways. And companies are incentivized now to try and take these technologies out of academic institutions and try to bring them to a commercial domain. Some of those are things like the orphan product designation. Some of them are the pediatric disease designations. So in an answer to, the previous question, there are a number of different mechanisms out there, just it's on the companies in many aspects to go out there and try and get them. But they do, as you've seen, have a lot of value for the companies to try and go after. The pediatric disease designations are a really great example of something that has doubled in value every time it's been sold or achieved by a company. So there are certain ways that the process can be accelerated, and you can use some of those regulatory designations to go after more feedback from the FDA at an earlier time point. And again, Sarepta is really a great example of that, of how they've tried to get that type of accelerated approval. So I hope that that's helpful for just a little bit to the person who asked the question a little bit earlier. But we're going to be talking about gene therapy 101 and things like that at another session at 2:45, so you can come on over to that too.
Hi, I'm just curious to know if the insurance companies are required to pay whatever the cost is of a rare disease drug, and Medicaid waivers would then pick up any balance that that the insurance company wouldn't pay.
I think there's a catch on the challenge is because when things are indicated and what the exact patient. So when there's a study done by the FDA, there's inclusion and exclusion criteria of who's in the study and who's not. Arguably, in some situations, if let's say I made the cutoff that there was no one younger than 6 in the clinical study, by definition, then the evidence does not support to be used in someone age 5. There are some insurance companies, because of the way that they run, they will say that's experimental use, I will not pay for it. But generally, for FDA-approved products that are included in the label and/or the inclusion/exclusion criteria, you have to pay for it. I would also say that most of these companies, as we were discussing as far as the patient support, now when we get into off-label, non-indicated uses where someone says, hey, I think it will be useful over here, there's a lot of pushback on those. But when we get to the FDA-approved indication, I think you're going to find very few patients who don't have access to the therapy through the insurance, and also that the drug company is not behind supporting in ways, including giving free product along the way. And it's different even in oncology by different states. So it's a great question. The challenge, and that's the challenge with a lot of this, is we're trying to paint this picture with very broad brush when there's a lot of little nuances. In oncology, there are many states that have to pay what they call compendia listing, and they do have to pay even if it's not FDA approved.
A question.
Coming.
This will be the last question. You can find them after. Therapies.
Thanks. Hi, Debra. I have a 13-year-old with Duchenne muscular dystrophy that spent over a third of his life in clinical trials, and I've been on this roller coaster with this community, and so I'm well aware of the costs. He's now on eteplirsen and has been for a couple of years now. And I absolutely understand how much goes into this effort and how extensive it's been, how lengthy it's been, how expensive it's been. Sitting from my perspective, though, I see a difference in what a company like Sarepta or Prosensa, BioMarin, GSK goes through, and a company who purchases a drug that's been available for 40 years, gets it classified as an orphan disease drug because only a few people are diagnosed with toxoplasmosis a year, and then capitalizes on that orphan designation to charge astronomical amounts of money. It's almost like legitimate drug development, like what Sarepta has done and what your son's drug company has done and have blessed all of our children with, and what I see as a parasite on the orphan disease drug development. And so I wonder whether you see that distinction as well, and how we handle that distinction as an ecosystem.
I mean, obviously there's a distinction between the two. I tend to be of the mindset that, there's always going to be some bad apples. It's human nature, And do we throw the baby out with the bathwater and regulate everybody to a point where it stifles innovation? I don't think that's the answer. So I don't really have the answer. I just would be cautious of overreacting to a few particular situations.
And that's certainly, I agree. There's always somebody that's going to do something, embarrassing, that's going to put a little black eye the bigger picture. But I've had this with some investors have asked this about certain drugs. Some drugs, I would argue, aren't as innovative as others, but maybe that didn't come out in the clinical trial. When you talk to the patient, it's changed their world. But is a 6-minute walk test really gonna, does that really show you what that's changed in that child's life? And I give the example of this little movement here is the difference of being able to operate my wheelchair without someone and with. And so the danger is, and I think the example you're talking to is an extreme, is where we start to cut that line. It's difficult. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't look at it and that we don't need to call out the bad apples. I'm open with that. But I also just want to caution of when we start going down that line of these definitions, it gets tough and it gets a little murky on some of these, and I don't want to harm the entire system. And I'm also, and I think that was the last question. Please, I'm going to be here all weekend. I would love nothing more. I'm very transparent. Please, I'd love nothing more than to continue this conversation and have a dialogue about it. So come grab me. I'm ready.
So thank you for working through technology. It's always the best part of these types of events, so we appreciate that. And let's give them another round of applause for the... We know this conversation is going to continue. I think you can hear two sides to every story, and having that open and honest dialogue, the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between is going to move us forward and get us to a good place. So appreciate all the great questions, and find them after. I think they're heading back to that corner. We're at a break for the afternoon. You'll have an afternoon snack sponsored by Biogen in the same place you had your other breaks. As a reminder, where the breakout sessions are. So if I was going to say to the how-tos, point to where the how-to sessions are. There. Okay. Session 2, where are you staying? Session 1, 3, and 4. Okay, and we had a little bit of a hallway issue for lunch. You can go back down this straight hall to get to 1, 3, and 4 for this round. So feel free to do that. We invite you back here at 4:45 for a special guest speaker. We're going to be honored to have Dr. Philip Riley, MD, JD, and an author of the recently released Orphan book. He's going to share his perspective on what rare disease is now and in the future. And that session will be followed by a free book signing sponsored by Sanofi Genzyme. We have 100 books to give out. There are a lot of you, so be there. Thank you.